During the pivotal winter of 1941 and the subsequent summer of 1942, the Oberkommando der Wehrmacht, the supreme command of the German armed forces, conceived a sweeping trans-continental double-envelopment that would enter the annals of military history as the Grosser Zangenangriff, or the Great Pincer, designed to win the war. The scale of this colossal strategic design was unprecedented, envisioning a simultaneous multi-theatre offensive that would shatter the British Empire in the Middle East, secure vital resources, and decapitate the Soviet Union from the south before American industrial power could be fully mobilized and deployed to the European continent. The northern arm of this grand pincer would drive through the Caucasus Mountains to seize the rich oil fields of Baku, while the southern arm, spearheaded by General Erwin Rommelâ's Panzer Army Africa, would defeat the British Eighth Army in Egypt and capture the vital Suez Canal. Rommel's forces would then sweep through Palestine, Jordan and Syria into Iraq and Persia, linking up with German forces descending from the Caucasus, which would simultaneously sever the Allied supply lines and guarantee secure oil reserves for the Axis war effort, turning the tide of World War II. The intellectual origins of the Great Pincer were deeply rooted in the strategic thinking of Adolf Hitler and General Franz Halder, chief of the Army General Staff, who realized that the German war economy was structurally crippled by an acute lack of liquid fuel and strategic raw materials. Modern military historians have demonstrated that the Great Pincer was an absolute logistical illusion, completely detached from the physical realities of geography, transport infrastructure, and industrial capacity that governed the conflict, proving that grand strategies must always be tethered to real-world operational capabilities. For the southern arm of the Grosser Zangenangriff to succeed, Erwin Rommelâ's Panzer Army Africa had to achieve what was logistically impossible: a rapid, sustained armoured advance across thousands of kilometres of waterless desert terrain against an increasingly well-fortified and materially superior British imperial defence. The North African campaign was fundamentally a war of port capacity and shipping tonnage, and the primary Axis ports of Tripoli and Benghazi were extremely small, poorly equipped, and situated at distances of 1,000, 1,400 and 1,000 kilometres, respectively, from the crucial front lines at El Alamein. To transport fuel, ammunition, water, and spare parts across these vast distances, the Panzer Army Africa relied almost exclusively on a single, narrow, paved coastal highway, the Via Balbia, which was constantly subjected to devastating air interdiction by the British Royal Air Force operating from Egypt. Because the Kriegsmarine could not protect the Mediterranean shipping lanes from British submarines and torpedo bombers operating from Malta, more than 30% of all Axis supply ships bound for Libya were routinely sunk, leaving Rommel's divisions chronically starved of essential fuel and spare parts. If Rommel had somehow managed to breach the British defensive lines at El Alamein, capture Alexandria, and reach the Suez Canal, his logistical nightmare would have intensified rather than vanished, as retreating British forces would have thoroughly demolished the port facilities of Alexandria and Suez. Rommel would have inherited a scorched earth desert landscape with no immediate means of importing supplies by sea, forcing his panzers to traverse the Sinai Desert, a trackless wasteland with no infrastructure capable of supporting heavy tracked vehicles, where his forces would have quickly ground to a halt. Concurrently, the northern arm of the Grosser Zangenangriff faced the majestic and impenetrable barrier of the Caucasus Mountains, which span over 1,200 kilometers from the Black Sea to the Caspian Sea, with peaks reaching over 5,000 meters, presenting a formidable natural wall against invasion. When Adolf Hitler issued Führer Directive 45, he committed a fatal strategic error by fragmenting his forces, dividing Army Group South into Army Group B, tasked with capturing Stalingrad, and Army Group A, tasked with conquering the Caucasus, leaving both drives under strength and logistically crippled. As the German mountain divisions reached the foothills of the Caucasus, the terrain dramatically favored the defense, with narrow rock-strewn passes like the Klukor and Maruk passes that could only be traversed by infantry and pack animals, rendering heavy armor and motorized artillery completely useless. The Red Army's Transcaucasus front, under the command of General Ivan Tulenev, utilized the terrain with exceptional skill, establishing heavily fortified positions in the key passes, constructing stone bunkers, mining the narrow mountain ledges, and deploying specialized mountain artillery that dominated the valleys below. In any analysis of the Grosser Zangenangriff, the geopolitical posture of the Republic of Turkey emerges as a massive, unyielding barrier that structurally prevented the Axis from executing a coherent flanking maneuver, standing as a mountainous land bridge separating Axis-controlled Europe from the Middle East. The Turkish president, İsmet İnönü, was a masterful diplomat who was determined to avoid the catastrophic errors of the First World War, maintaining a policy of strict, armed neutrality, balancing precariously between the Allies and the Axis while building up a formidable army. By late 1942, the Turkish army numbered nearly 1 million well-trained, highly motivated soldiers dug into the extremely rugged and mountainous terrain of Anatolia, a natural fortress that would have turned any German invasion into an incredibly bloody, slow-moving war of attrition. Even if Rommel's Panzer Army Africa had breached the Suez Canal and crawled across the Middle Eastern deserts, they would have emerged into a deep, heavily fortified Allied defensive zone, specifically defended by the British 10th Army under General Edward Quinnan in Iraq and Persia. Following the successful Anglo-Soviet invasion of Iran in August 1941, the Allies had secured total control over the region's transportation infrastructure, establishing the Persian Corridor as the primary conduit for American Lend-Lease aid to flow steadily to the struggling Soviet Union. The British 10th Army was fully prepared to fight a mobile defensive campaign to protect the vital oil refineries of Abadan and the oil fields of Kirkuk and Mosul, while the Soviet Union maintained massive, fresh military forces south of the Caucasus Mountains. Ultimately, the Grosser Zangenangriff remains one of the most compelling and grandiose strategic concepts of the Second World War. But when subjected to rigorous logistical, geographic, and economic analysis, it stands revealed as a grand strategic fantasy beyond the physical capabilities of the Axis. The unyielding laws of logistics and geography dictated that Germany's only realistic option was not to expand the conflict into the Middle East, but to focus its existing resources along a single, undivided operational axis toward the Caucasus, avoiding the costly and catastrophic meatgrinder of Stalingrad.